Imagine for a terrifying moment that you are 80 years old. Your hands, once strong enough to till the earth, are now trembling uncontrollably. Your lungs, which once breathed life into your family, are filling with fluid, rattling like broken glass in your chest. You are sitting on the sharp, freezing gravel of a highway shoulder in the middle of nowhere. The night is pitch black, swallowed by a storm so violent it feels like the wrath of God. Cars scream past you at 70 miles an hour, monsters of steel and light. Their tires spray dirty, freezing sludge onto your face. You try to wave, to scream, but your voice is too weak. No one stops. No one sees you. You are invisible. This is not a nightmare. This is exactly where Frank and Helen Miller found themselves on a freezing Tuesday night in Texas. But the most horrifying part of this story isn't the storm. It isn't the cold. It's how they got there. They weren't victims of a carjacking. They weren't lost. They were put there by the one person who was supposed to love them more than life itself. This is the shocking true story of the Miller family. A tale of a sacrifice so great it bankrupted 2 lives, and a betrayal so dark it shook the heavens. 30. Chapter 1. The Promise in the Dust. Narrator. To understand the tragedy on Interstate 40, we have to go back. Long before the rain and the heartbreak, there was just the sun. The scorching, golden sun of Stillwater, Oklahoma. Frank Miller was a man cut from the old cloth of America. Born in 1945, he was the youngest of 6 children in a family of wheat farmers. He didn't grow up with television or video games. He grew up with the smell of turned earth and the ache of hard labor in his muscles. His father taught him a simple code: work hard, pray often, and never owe a man a dime you can't pay back. Helen was no different. She was the daughter of a widowed seamstress. While other girls were playing with dolls, Helen was learning to stitch hems and cook stew for neighbors who couldn't afford to eat. Poverty didn't make her bitter. It made her kind. It gave her a heart that broke for everyone else's pain. They met in the summer of 1968 at the Payne County Fair. Frank was fixing a broken fence behind the cattle barn. Helen was handing out homemade cherry pies at the church booth. It wasn't a whirlwind romance like in the movies. It was quieter, deeper. Frank looked at her, wiped the grease from his hands, and felt like he had finally come home. 6 months later, they were married in a tiny white church with peeling paint. They had no money for a honeymoon. Their wedding dinner was a potluck. But they had each other, and for Frank and Helen, that was enough. For 15 years, they built a life on a small patch of farmland. It wasn't much, just 40 acres and a farmhouse that leaned a little to the left. But it was theirs. They worked from sunrise to sunset. Frank in the fields, battling droughts and pests. Helen in the house, taking in sewing work until her fingers were calloused and sore. But there was a silence in the farmhouse. A silence that grew louder with every passing Christmas. The nursery was empty. O for Hundweg. Chapter 2. The Miracle Child. Narrator. They wanted a child. Oh, how they wanted a child. For over a decade, Helen prayed every night, her knees pressed against the hard wooden floorboards. Lord, she would whisper, tears soaking her clasped hands. I don't need riches. I don't need a new house. Just give me someone to love. Doctors told them it was impossible. Too much stress, too many health complications. But Frank and Helen refused to give up hope. They kept the spare room ready. They kept praying. And then, in 1983, the impossible happened. Helen began to feel sick in the mornings. A visit to the doctor confirmed what science said couldn't be true. At the age of 38, Helen was pregnant. When the doctor told them, Frank didn't cheer. He simply fell to his knees right there in the examination room and wept, burying his face in Helen's lap. 9 months later, Michael Miller came into the world. He was perfect. 10 fingers, 10 toes, and eyes so bright Helen swore they reflected the sky. Frank held his son with a tenderness that terrified him. He looked down at this tiny, fragile life and made a vow that would seal his fate. "You will never suffer like I did," Frank whispered to the sleeping baby. "You will never know hunger. You will never know the cold. I will give you the world, even if I have to break my back to do it." They named him Michael, which means, "Who is like God?" To them, he was their little Messiah, their savior from a lonely life. They had no idea that this beautiful boy would one day become the author of their destruction. 0630. Chapter 3. The Golden Cage. Narrator. As Michael grew, it became clear he wasn't destined for the farm. He was brilliant. By age 6, he was reading books meant for teenagers. By 12, he was fixing the farm's accounting books. By high school, he was the valedictorian, charming, sharp, and ambitious. Frank and Helen were bursting with pride. Every A on a report card was a victory. Every award was a validation of their struggle. But there was a distance growing, too. Michael didn't like the farm. He hated the smell of manure. He hated the dirt under his fingernails. He looked at his father's rough hands, not with respect, but with something that looked a lot like pity or shame. "I'm getting out of here, Dad," Michael would say, staring at the horizon. "I'm going to be rich. I'm going to live in a city where the streets are paved, and I never have to wear work boots again." Frank would just smile and nod. "I know you will, son. I know you will." Then came the acceptance letter. The University of Texas at Austin, a prestigious school for a prestigious mind. Michael ran into the kitchen, waving the envelope, his face glowing with a joy Frank had never seen. "I got in! Mom, Dad, I got in!" Helen hugged him, crying tears of joy. But over her shoulder, Frank saw the tuition breakdown included in the packet. $60,000 a year. Housing, books, fees. Frank did the math in his head. Their savings account held just under $20,000, money it had taken them 40 years to save. That night, the farmhouse was quiet. Helen sat at the kitchen table, staring at the numbers. "We can't afford it, Frank," she whispered, her voice trembling. "We have to tell him no. He can go to the community college. It's a good school." Frank sat on the porch, looking out at the moonlit fields. He looked at the barn he had built with his own hands. He looked at the land his father had left him. He thought about his vow. "You will never suffer like I did." He walked back inside, his face set in stone. "No," Frank said. "He's going." "But how?" Helen asked, tears spilling over. "We have nothing left to give." Frank placed his hand on the table. "We have the farm." Helen gasped. "Frank, that's our retirement. That's our home. That's everything." "It's just dirt and wood, Helen," Frank said softly, though his heart was breaking. "Michael is our legacy. If we don't give him this chance, he'll stay here. He'll become me. And I love him too much to let that happen." 3 days later, Frank and Helen Miller signed the papers. They sold the farm. They sold the house. They sold the tractor. They took a check for $310,000, the sum total of their entire existence, and deposited it into a bank account for Michael. They moved into a rusted, single-wide trailer behind Helen's sister's house. It was cramped. It smelled of mildew. The roof leaked when it rained. But neither of them complained. Not once. Because every time they looked at a picture of Michael standing on that university campus, smiling and handsome, they felt rich. 10 Huntwag. Chapter 4. The Silent Adrift. Narrator. They thought the distance would be hard. They thought they would miss him. But they didn't expect the silence. At first, Michael called every week. He talked about his classes, his new friends, the parties. But slowly, the calls changed. They became shorter. Transactional. Hey, Dad, I need money for books. Hey, Mom, rent is due. I can't talk long. I have a mixer to get to. Frank would send the checks. Helen would send care packages with homemade cookies. He's just busy, Helen would say, clutching the phone to her chest after he hung up without saying, I love you. He's building a future. Years passed. Michael graduated and stayed in Texas. He was hired by a top-tier financial firm in Dallas. He started his own company, Miller Capital Strategies. He became a shark in a suit. He bought a penthouse. He bought a Tesla. He vacationed in Bali and Aspen. Meanwhile, back in the trailer in Oklahoma, time was cruel to Frank and Helen. Frank's back gave out. He couldn't work the fences anymore. Helen developed a heart condition, hypertension, and arrhythmia that left her weak and breathless. Their medical bills began to pile up on the small Formica table. They never asked Michael for a dime. They didn't want to be a burden. He has his own life, Frank insisted, taping up his old work boots with duct tape because he couldn't afford new ones. We'll manage. But the silence from Dallas grew deafening. Michael stopped coming home for Thanksgiving. He stopped coming for Christmas. When he did call, maybe once every 3 months, his voice was cold, impatient. What is it now, Dad? I'm in a meeting. Michael, your mother just wanted to hear your voice. I'll call her later. He never did. The separation wasn't just physical. It was a separation of worlds. Michael had scrubbed the farm off his skin. He was embarrassed by his parents. He told his colleagues his parents were retired landowners, letting them assume he came from old money. He never mentioned the trailer. He never mentioned the sacrifice. 13 Huntwag. Chapter 5. The Desperate Journey. Narrator. The breaking point came in the winter of 2024. Helen collapsed in the kitchen. Frank, terrified, called 911. The doctors stabilized her, but the news was grim. Her heart was failing. She needed specialized care, expensive medication, and constant monitoring. Frank sat by her hospital bed, holding her thin hand. The guilt was eating him alive. He had given everything to his son, and now he couldn't even afford to save his wife. We have to tell him, Frank whispered. He has money, Helen. He can help us. He's our son. Helen looked weak, her skin pale as the sheets. I don't want to bother him, Frank. It's not a bother, Frank's voice cracked. It's life or death. Frank called Michael, straight to voicemail. He called again the next day. Voicemail. He sent a text. Mom is sick. Bad. Please call. 3 days later, a reply came. It wasn't a phone call, just a text. I'm swamped with the merger. Can't talk. What do you need? That text broke Frank's heart more than the poverty ever had. He realized that a phone call wouldn't work. Michael had become a ghost, a stranger. We have to go to him, Helen said one evening, struggling to sit up. If he sees us, if he sees me like this, he'll remember. He'll remember who we are. It was a desperate, naive hope, but it was all they had. They took the last of their cash, literal jar money, and bought 2 tickets on a Greyhound bus to Dallas. The ride was grueling. 6 hours of bumping roads and crying babies. Frank held Helen's hand the entire way, praying that this gamble would pay off, praying that the boy he raised was still in there somewhere, buried under the designer suits and the greed. 1600. Chapter 6. The Reunion. Narrator. Dallas was cold and gray when they arrived. The skyscrapers loomed over them like giant tombstones. They stood on the curb of the bus terminal, huddled together against the biting wind. Frank texted Michael. "We are here, at the station." Wait time. 10 minutes. 20. 45. Finally, a sleek, black Mercedes GLE pulled up. The window rolled down. There was no smile, no warmth, just Michael, looking at his watch. "You're late," he said. Helen's face fell, but she forced a smile. "Traffic was bad, honey. It's so good to see you." "Get in," Michael muttered. "I don't have all day." The inside of the car smelled of expensive leather and vanilla. It was a different universe from the Greyhound bus, but the air was freezing. Michael blasted the AC, despite the winter chill outside. "Michael," Frank said softly from the back seat, "your mother is freezing." "It keeps me awake," Michael snapped. "I've been working 18-hour days while you two play tourist." Frank bit his tongue. "We're not tourists, son. We came because we need help. Your mom's heart." Michael cranked up the radio volume, drowning him out. "Not now, Dad. I can't deal with your drama right now. I have a client dinner in an hour." Helen sat in silence, tears welling in her eyes. She looked at the back of her son's head, the hair she used to comb, the neck she used to kiss. And she felt like she was looking at a stranger. Then nature called. The stress and the medication were wreaking havoc on Helen's body. "Michael," she whispered, leaning forward. "I need to stop. I need a restroom." Michael sighed, a loud, exaggerated sound of annoyance. "Are you kidding me? We're on the highway." "Please, honey. It's urgent." Michael's knuckles turned white on the steering wheel. A darkness seemed to pass over his face. He didn't just look annoyed, he looked hateful. "You know what?" he muttered. "I'm done. I am so done with this." He swerved the car violently to the right. Horns blared around them as he cut across 3 lanes of traffic. "What are you doing?" Frank cried out, grabbing the door handle. "You want to stop?" Michael yelled. "Fine, we're stopping." The Mercedes screeched to a halt on the gravel shoulder of Interstate 40. Mile marker 219. Miles from the city. Miles from safety. The storm had just begun to break, heavy drops of freezing rain slapping against the windshield. 1830. Chapter 7. The Unthinkable. Narrator. Michael hit the unlock button. "Get out!" Helen blinked, confused. "What? Here? Michael, there's no bathroom here." "I don't care!" Michael turned around, his eyes blazing with a cold, terrifying fury. "Get out of my car, both of you!" "Son, you can't be serious," Frank said, his voice trembling with disbelief. "It's pouring rain. Your mother is sick." "I am not your chauffeur," Michael screamed. "I am not your nurse. You drain me. You've always drained me. I gave you money, I gave you time, and you just show up unannounced? No, I'm cutting the cord." He got out of the car. He marched to the back door and yanked it open. The wind howled into the cabin, bringing the freezing rain with it. He grabbed his father's arm, the arm that had once carried him to bed, and yanked him out. Frank stumbled, his old legs giving way on the loose gravel. He fell hard onto the wet stones. "Frank!" Helen screamed. She scrambled out to help him, her frail body shaking violently in the wind. "Michael, please!" she cried, looking up at her son. "Don't do this! We have nowhere to go!" Michael stood over them. Tall, powerful, rich. He looked down at his parents, shivering in the mud, looking like discarded rags. For a second, Frank hoped. He hoped to see a flicker of humanity, a spark of the boy who used to catch fireflies in the jar. But there was nothing. Just the dead eyes of a man who had sold his soul for a bank account. "Figure it out," Michael said. He got back into the warmth of the Mercedes. He slammed the door. The sound echoed like a gunshot. Frank scrambled to his feet, banging on the window with his weak, liver-spotted fists. "Michael! She will die out here! Michael!" The engine revved. The tires spun, flinging a spray of mud into Frank's face. The car tore away, merging back into the highway traffic, its red taillights disappearing into the curtain of rain. And then, silence. Just the wind. Just the rain. Just the terrifying realization that they were alone. Frank crawled over to Helen, wrapping his coat around her, though it was already soaked through. They sat there, huddled against the metal guardrail, two tiny specks in a massive, uncaring world. "He left us, Frank," Helen whispered, her voice breaking. "Our boy left us." Frank held her tight, tears mixing with the rain on his cheeks. He checked his pockets. No phone. It was in the canvas bag, which was still in Michael's trunk. Hypothermia takes time, but in the freezing rain, with failing hearts and old bones, time was a luxury they didn't have. 1 hour passed, then 2. Frank's breathing turned into a rattle. Helen's shaking began to slow down, a sign that her body was giving up. Cars rushed by, hundreds of them. But in the dark, in the storm, the couple looked like nothing more than a pile of trash on the roadside. Frank looked up at the black sky. He didn't pray for a car to stop. He didn't think anyone would ever stop. He prayed for the end to be quick. "I'm sorry, Helen," he rasped. "I'm so sorry." But just as Frank Miller closed his eyes, preparing to die, a pair of headlights appeared in the distance. They weren't moving like the others. They were slow, steady, purposeful, and they were coming right for them. Music swells, a deep, ominous yet hopeful drone. Narrator: who was in that truck? Was it a savior? Or was it something stranger? Frank and Helen were about to meet someone who would change the course of history. But first, they had to survive the night. Have you ever stared death in the face? Not in a movie, not in a nightmare, but in real life? Scientists tell us that freezing to death, clinical hypothermia, is a seductive way to die. It starts with pain. Your skin burns as the cold crystallizes the water in your cells. Your muscles lock up, shivering so hard it feels like your bones might snap. But then, the pain stops. The shivering fades. Your brain, starved of oxygen, begins to lie to you. It tells you that you are warm. It tells you that the wet mud beneath you is a feather bed. It tells you to close your eyes and sleep. On the side of Interstate 40, at mile marker 219, Frank Miller had reached that final, fatal stage. The roar of the Texas highway had faded into a dull, rhythmic hum, like the sound of the ocean inside a seashell. He couldn't feel his legs anymore. He couldn't feel the freezing sludge soaking through his thin flannel shirt. He couldn't even feel the hand of his wife, Helen, which he was gripping with the last ounce of his strength. Frank looked at the guardrail. In his mind, it wasn't a guardrail anymore. It was the white fence of his old farm in Oklahoma. He saw his father standing there, waving. "Helen," Frank whispered, his head drooping heavily onto his chest. His voice was a wet rattle. I think the work is done now. I'm going to sleep." Helen was in no better shape. Her heart, already weak from years of untreated hypertension, was fluttering like a trapped moth. She heard Frank's words, and terror pierced through her fog. "No, Frank," she gasped, shaking his arm with fingers that were blue and stiff. "Frank, look at me. Don't close your eyes. If you sleep, you won't wake up." "It's warm now, Helen," he murmured, a faint, delirious smile touching his lips. "So warm." Helen screamed, or tried to. It came out as a broken sob. "Help us. Please, God. Don't let him die like this. Not here. Not in the dirt." Her cry was swallowed instantly by the wind. A semi-truck roared past, its 18 wheels spraying a wall of dirty, freezing water over them. Helen collapsed across Frank's chest, shielding him with her own frail body, waiting for the end. She closed her eyes and began to recite the Lord's Prayer, her words lost in the storm. But then, the light appeared. It didn't sweep past them like the others. It didn't rush. It grew. A pair of headlights cut through the curtain of rain. White, piercing, steady. They weren't the yellow, hazy lights of an old sedan, nor the blinding LEDs of a modern luxury car. They were different. They seemed to push the darkness back physically. Helen blinked, shielding her eyes. Was this it? Was this the tunnel of light the dying see? But then she heard the crunch of gravel, the hiss of air brakes. A white Ford F-150 pulled onto the shoulder, 50 feet away. Its hazard lights began to pulse. Click, clack, click, clack, like a slow, steady heartbeat in the chaos. The engine died. The lights stayed on. For a moment, nothing happened. The truck just sat there, a silent sentinel in the hurricane. Then, the driver's door opened. 03:45. Chapter 8. The Man Who Walked Through Water. Narrator. A figure stepped out into the deluge. He was tall, wearing a simple, worn denim jacket and dark work boots. He didn't run to avoid the rain. He didn't hunch his shoulders against the wind. He walked with a calm, terrifying slowness. Every step he took splashed in the puddles, yet he moved as if the storm simply didn't exist for him. Helen watched him approach. Fear gripped her. Was this a robber? A killer? They had nothing left to steal. But as he got closer, the fear evaporated. It was replaced by a sudden, overwhelming wave of heat. Not physical heat, but the kind of warmth you feel when you drink hot tea after a long winter walk. He knelt in the mud beside them. The rain plastered his dark hair to his forehead, but his eyes were dry. They were brown, deep, and filled with an ancient, unbearable sorrow. He didn't look at the cars rushing by. He looked only at them. "Ma'am," the stranger said. His voice was low, resonant, vibrating in Helen's chest. "You have waited a long time." He didn't ask, "Are you okay?" He didn't ask, "What happened?" He didn't ask, "Do you need a ride?" He spoke as if he had an appointment with them, as if he had known for 1,000 years that he would meet them at mile marker 219 on this specific Tuesday. He reached out and touched Frank's cheek. Frank, who had stopped shivering minutes ago, suddenly gasped. A deep, violent intake of air. His eyes flew open, wide and lucid. Who Frank wheezed, staring at the man. "Who are you?" The stranger smiled. It was a small, sad smile. "I am a friend. Come, the storm is passing." He didn't wait for permission. He slid his arms under Frank's unconscious body and lifted him. An 80-pound man, dead weight, lifted as easily as a child. "Can you walk?" he asked Helen. I don't think so," she stammered, her teeth chattering again. "Lean on me." He offered his arm. When Helen touched his jacket, she expected cold, wet denim. Instead, it felt warm. Impossibly warm, like it had been baking in the sun for hours. Supported by his strength, she stumbled toward the truck. Inside the cab of the Ford F-150, the silence was absolute. The roar of the storm outside was muffled to a whisper. It smelled of cedar wood, rain, and something sweet, like lilies. The stranger placed Frank gently in the passenger seat and reclined it. He helped Helen into the back. He pulled thick wool blankets from under the seat. "Wrap these around him," he instructed gently. "Tight." Helen did as she was told. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely hold the fabric. "Thank you," she sobbed, burying her face in the wool. "Thank you. You saved our lives. My son left us." The stranger put the truck in gear. He looked in the rearview mirror, meeting Helen's eyes. His expression hardened, not at her, but at the mention of the son. "I know," he said. The temperature in the truck seemed to drop for a split second. "I saw." "You saw?" Helen asked, confused. "Were you following us?" The stranger didn't answer. He simply pulled the truck back onto the highway. But as they merged into traffic, Helen noticed something impossible. The rain stopped hitting their windshield. She looked out the side window. It was pouring. Sheets of water were hammering the asphalt. But around the white truck, there was a dry pocket, a bubble of calm moving at 60 miles an hour through the chaos. She looked at the back of the driver's head. "Where are you taking us?" she whispered. "To Baylor Medical," he said softly. "To a place where you will be healed, and where justice will begin." 0730. Chapter 9. The Silent Invasion. Narrator. Baylor Medical Center in Dallas is a fortress of modern medicine. Glass, steel, and fluorescent lights. On a stormy night like this, the emergency room is usually a war zone. Car crash victims, heart attacks, overdoses. It is loud, chaotic, and smells of antiseptic and fear. But when the automatic doors slid open at 11:45 p.m., the chaos seemed to freeze. The stranger walked in first, carrying Frank in his arms like a father carrying a sleeping child. Helen limped beside him, clutching his jacket. He didn't stop at the triage desk. He didn't wait for the security guard to ask for ID. He walked straight through the waiting room, parting the crowd of sick and injured people like a ship cutting through water. A head nurse, a formidable woman named Brenda, who had run this ER for 20 years, looked up from her computer. She opened her mouth to yell, "Sir, you can't go back there!" But the words died in her throat. When she looked at the man, she felt a sudden, inexplicable urge to bow her head. "I need a bed," the stranger said. He didn't shout, but his voice carried over the beeping monitors and crying babies. "Trauma room 4 is empty. We will take that one." Brenda blinked. How did he know Trauma 4 was empty? We just cleared it 2 minutes ago. She scrambled out from behind the desk. "Sir, wait. We need to process—" "He is hypothermic," the stranger interrupted, walking past her. "Core temperature 89 degrees. Fluid in the lungs. Stage 2 pneumonia. The woman is in atrial fibrillation. Heart rate 145. He rattled off the diagnosis with the precision of a chief of surgery, yet he wore no badge, no stethoscope, just that wet denim jacket. Brenda signaled the orderlies. Get a team to Trauma 4, now, stat! Doctors swarmed the room. They took Frank from the stranger's arms and laid him on the gurney. They began cutting off his wet clothes, hooking up IVs, shouting orders. Get a central line. Where's respiratory? BP is crashing. 80/40. In the midst of the hurricane of medical activity, the stranger stepped back. He stood in the corner, near the sink. He didn't get in the way, but he didn't leave. He watched. A young administrative nurse, nervous and holding a clipboard, approached him timidly. Excuse me, sir?" The stranger turned his gaze to her. She felt her knees go weak. He was beautiful, in a terrifying way. "Yes, child. I need their information. For billing. Do they have insurance? Trauma care is very expensive." The stranger reached into his jacket pocket. He pulled out a thick envelope. He placed it in her hand. "This is for the hospital," he said. The nurse opened it. It was full of cash. Hundreds. Thousands. She gasped. "Sir, this is too much. I can't just take cash like this. I need a billing address. I need a name." "It is not too much," he said gently. "Use it for them. And if there is any left over, use it for the man in room 7 who cannot afford his insulin." The nurse's jaw dropped. The man in room 7 had just been arguing with billing about that exact issue. No one could have heard that conversation from here. "Who are you?" she whispered, clutching the envelope. He smiled. "I am the one who found them. That is all you need to know." He turned back to watch Frank. The nurse looked down at the money in her hands. It was dry, perfectly crisp, even though water was still dripping from the stranger's jacket onto the floor. 11:15. Chapter 10. The Medical Impossibility. Narrator. Inside the trauma room, Dr. Evans was losing the battle. Frank Miller was 80 years old. His body had been subjected to freezing temperatures for hours. His immune system was shot. "I'm not getting a good pulse," Dr. Evans shouted, looking at the monitor. The line was waving erratically. "He's going into VFib. Charge the paddles. Clear." Thump. Frank's body arched off the bed. Nothing. The monitor whined. "Again! Charge to 200. Clear!" Thump. Still nothing. A flatline began to drone. A high-pitched, endless note of death. Dr. Evans sighed, lowering the paddles. He looked at the clock to call the time of death. He is not dead," the voice came from the corner. Calm. Absolute. Dr. Evans whipped around. "Who let this man in here? Security! Get him out!" The stranger didn't move. He walked to the bedside. The nurses stepped back, pushed away by an invisible pressure. He placed his hand on Frank's chest, right over his heart. "Frank," the stranger whispered. "Wake up." It wasn't a shout. It was a whisper. But it sounded like the cracking of a glacier. On the monitor, beep. Dr. Evans froze. Beep, beep, beep. A perfect sinus rhythm. 72 beats per minute. Strong. Steady. The oxygen saturation alarm stopped ringing. The numbers climbed. 80%. 90%. 98%. Frank's chest rose. He took a deep, shuddering breath, his lungs clearing instantly as if the fluid had simply evaporated. Frank's eyes opened. He looked at the doctor, then past him, to the man in the denim jacket. "You," Frank breathed. "You're still here." "I never left," the stranger said. Dr. Evans stared at the monitor, then at the patient, then at his own hands. "That's impossible," he muttered. That's medically impossible. He was gone. His heart had stopped. The stranger looked at the doctor. Medicine treats the body, doctor. I treat the life. Meanwhile, in the adjacent bay, Helen was undergoing her own transformation. The warming blankets had raised her temperature, but her heart was still erratic. She was weeping, asking for her son. Where is Michael? Did he come back? Is he here? The nurse holding her hand looked sad. No, honey. No one called. The stranger walked from Frank's bedside to Helen's. He took her hand. Helen, he said, your heart is breaking. Not from disease, but from sorrow. Helen looked up at him, tears streaming into her ears. Why did he do this? We gave him everything. We sold the farm. We lived in a box for him. Why? The stranger squeezed her hand. His face darkened with a fierce, protective anger. Because greed blinds the soul, Helen. He loves gold more than he loves the ones who gave him life. But do not weep for him. Weep for yourself no longer. He placed a hand on her forehead. Helen felt a jolt, like electricity, but without the pain. A warm, golden light seemed to flood her vision. The crushing weight on her chest vanished. The sorrow that had been choking her for years lifted. She felt peace. Sleep now, the stranger commanded. And she did. Instantly. A deep, restorative sleep. The stranger stood between the two beds. The doctors and nurses watched him in silence. No one dared to ask him to leave again. They realized they were in the presence of something they couldn't diagnose. 15 Huntwag. Chapter 11. The Attorney's Nightmare. Narrator. While the miracle unfolded in the hospital, a different scene was playing out in a high-rise condo in downtown Dallas. Mark Hensley, the city's most ruthless corporate attorney, was asleep. Mark was not a good man. He defended polluters, embezzlers, and corrupt politicians. He charged $800 an hour and slept like a baby. Usually. Tonight, Mark was having a nightmare. In his dream, he was standing in a courtroom, but the judge's bench was empty. The jury box was empty. He was alone, and the room was filling with water. Freezing, muddy water. He tried to run, but the doors were locked. The water rose to his neck. He screamed for help, but no sound came out. Then a phone rang. Not in the dream, in reality. Ring, ring. Mark gasped, waking up in a cold sweat. He sat up, his heart hammering against his ribs. The bedside clock read 3:15 a.m. The phone on his nightstand was buzzing. Unknown number. Mark rubbed his face, angry and shaken. Who calls at this hour? He swiped answer. This is Hensley. If this isn't an emergency, I'm suing you for harassment. Mark. The voice on the other end froze the blood in Mark's veins. It wasn't loud. It wasn't shouting. But it sounded familiar. It sounded like the voice he used to hear in his head when he was a child, before he learned to ignore his conscience. Who is this? Mark whispered. I have a case for you, the voice said. The plaintiff is a man named Frank Miller. The defendant is his son, Michael. Mark frowned. I don't take family law. Call my secretary in the morning. This is not family law, the voice cut in. This is a capital crime. Tonight, Michael Miller abandoned his parents to die on the shoulder of Interstate 40. He stole their life savings. He left them to the storm. Mark fell silent. He looked out his window at the rain lashing against the glass. "Who are you?" Mark asked again, his voice trembling. "How do you have my number?" "I know everything you have done, Mark," the voice said. "I know about the bribe you took last year in the Peterson case. I know about the evidence you buried in 2019. Mark stopped breathing. No one knew that. No one. Are you the FBI?" "I am offering you a chance at redemption," the voice said. "Bring everything you can find on Michael Miller to Baylor Medical Center. Do not sleep. Do not eat. Just bring the truth." Click. The line went dead. Mark sat there in the dark for a long minute. He should go back to sleep. He should call the police. But he couldn't. His hands were shaking. He felt a pull, a magnetic, irresistible command. He got out of bed. He opened his laptop. He logged into the databases that only lawyers of his caliber had access to. He typed in, "Michael Miller. Miller Capital Strategies." And he began to dig. 30. Chapter 12. The Dossier of Judgment. Narrator. At 6:00 a.m., the storm had finally broken. The sun was trying to peek through the gray clouds. Mark Hensley walked into the waiting room of Baylor Medical Center. He looked wrecked, his eyes were red, his suit was rumpled. He was carrying a thick leather briefcase. He saw the stranger sitting in the corner, staring out the window. Mark hesitated. The man looked ordinary, just a guy in a denim jacket. But the air around him crackled with energy. Mark walked over and sat down. He didn't say hello. He just unlocked the briefcase and slid a thick stack of papers across the table. "You were right," Mark said hoarsely. "God help us, you were right." The stranger turned his gaze to the papers. "Show me." Mark flipped open the file. Michael Miller is running a Ponzi scheme, a big one, $42 million in fraudulent assets. He targets the elderly specifically. He finds retirees with dementia, gets power of attorney, and drains their accounts. The stranger's face remained calm, but his eyes grew intense. And his parents? Mark swallowed hard. This was the part that had made him vomit in his bathroom sink an hour ago. He liquidated their assets 2 years ago. The farm sale, $310,000. He didn't invest it. He spent it on a down payment for his penthouse and a gambling debt in Macau. Mark pulled out a USB drive. "And I found this." He records his calls. Paranoia. This is from last night, 9:00 p.m., just after he dropped them off. Mark played the audio. Michael's voice. "It's done. They're gone. Mile marker 219. They won't survive the night. By tomorrow, I'll have the land rights." A pause, then a laugh. A cold, soulless laugh. The stranger closed his eyes. For a moment, the hospital waiting room ceased to exist. Mark felt like he was standing on the edge of a volcano. The silence was heavy, suffocating. "He laughed," the stranger said softly. "Yes," Mark whispered. "He laughed." The stranger stood up. As he rose, he seemed to grow taller. The morning light hitting the window behind him fractured, creating a halo around his head. "He believes he is untouchable," the stranger said. "He believes that because he is rich, he is a god. He has forgotten that every breath he takes is a gift I gave him." Mark stared up at him. What do we do? Do we call the police?" The stranger looked down at Mark. His eyes were no longer brown. They were burning gold. "The police are already coming, Mark. But they deal with the laws of man. I deal with the laws of the spirit." He placed his hand on the dossier. "Today," the stranger declared, his voice echoing like thunder in a canyon, "Michael Miller loses everything. His money, his name, his freedom. He sowed the wind. Now he will reap the whirlwind. Go," he told Mark. "Release the evidence. To the press. To the FBI. To everyone." "And you?" Mark asked, scrambling to pack his bag. "Where will you go?" The stranger turned toward the ICU doors. "I am going to wake my children and tell them that their debt is paid. They say pride comes before the fall. But for Michael Miller, it wasn't just a fall. It was an annihilation. The morning after leaving his parents to die in the freezing rain, Michael woke up feeling fantastic. He stretched in his 600 thread-count Egyptian cotton sheets. He looked out the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse at the Dallas skyline. The storm had passed, leaving the sky a crisp, innocent blue. He checked his phone. No missed calls from his father. "Good," he thought, taking a sip of his espresso. "It's done." Nature took its course. He adjusted his silk tie in the mirror, smiling at his reflection. He saw a winner, a titan of industry, a man who had trimmed the dead weight from his life. He honestly believed he had gotten away with murder. He didn't know that 5 miles away, a team of 20 FBI agents was currently loading battering rams into an armored van. He didn't know that his bank accounts were already blinking red. He didn't know that the man he called Dad was currently eating a warm breakfast, sitting across from the creator of the universe. Michael grabbed his briefcase and headed for the elevator. It was going to be a great day. It was actually going to be his last day as a free man. 0230. Chapter 13. The Collapse of the Empire. Narrator. The first crack in the glass appeared at 8:45 a.m. Michael walked into the lobby of his investment firm, Miller Capital. Usually, the receptionist, Sarah, would greet him with a terrified smile and a fresh coffee. Today, the front desk was empty. The phones were ringing off the hook, a cacophony of digital chirps echoing through the sleek, modern office. Michael frowned. "Sarah?" he barked. "Where is everyone?" He walked past the glass conference room. His team of junior brokers wasn't working. They were huddled around a laptop, whispering. When they saw him, they didn't stand up. They scattered. They looked at him with something Michael had never seen before: disgust. He stormed into his office and slammed the door. "Incompetent idiots," he muttered. He sat down at his mahogany desk and tried to log into his primary offshore account in the Cayman Islands. He needed to transfer the inheritance money he expected to get from his parents' land. Access denied. Michael blinked. He typed the password again. Account frozen by federal order. His heart skipped a beat. A cold sweat prickled on his neck. He tried his personal Chase account. Frozen. He tried his American Express Black Card. Declined. "What the hell is going on?" he hissed, reaching for his office phone to call his lawyer. The line was dead. Suddenly, his cell phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. It read, "Honor thy father and thy mother, that thy days may be long upon the land. Your days are up." Michael stared at the screen, his hands shaking. Who sent that? How did they know? And then he heard it. Sound FX, sirens. Not one, dozens, screaming closer and closer. He ran to the window. Below, the street was swarming with flashing blue and red lights. Police cruisers, FBI SUVs, news vans. They weren't there for a traffic stop. They were blocking the entrance to his building. 0515. Chapter 14. The Walk of Shame. Narrator. The elevator doors chimed, but it wasn't a client. 6 federal agents in tactical gear poured into the hallway, weapons drawn. "Michael Miller, hands in the air. Do it now." Michael stood behind his desk, trembling in his expensive Italian suit. "You can't do this. Do you know who I am? I manage $40 million in assets." The lead agent, a tall woman with eyes like steel, marched up to him and slammed him face first onto the mahogany desk. "You manage nothing," she said, clicking the handcuffs tight. "You are under arrest for securities fraud, wire fraud, elder abuse, and attempted capital murder." "Murder?" Michael shrieked as they dragged him out. "Nobody died. It was just a ride. I gave them a ride." "Save it for the jury," the agent spat. They paraded him out the front door. The lobby was packed with his former employees, all recording on their phones. The Titan of Dallas was weeping, snot running down his face, begging for someone to call his lawyer. Outside, the media was waiting. Attorney Mark Hensley had done his job well. He had leaked the story to every major network in Texas. As Michael was shoved into the back of a squad car, a reporter shoved a microphone in his face. "Mr. Miller, is it true you left your 80-year-old parents to freeze to death on I-40? Is it true you stole their farm money to buy this car?" Michael looked into the camera, his eyes wide with terror. He realized then that the money hadn't protected him. The status hadn't protected him. The entire world was watching him fall. And somewhere, deep in his soul, he felt a strange, burning heat. Not the heat of the sun, but the heat of a judgment he couldn't bribe his way out of. 00800. Chapter 15. The Revelation. Narrator. While Michael's world was burning to ash, the atmosphere in Baylor Medical Center was filled with a golden, serene peace. Frank and Helen were sitting up in bed. They were weak, yes, but alive. The color had returned to their cheeks. The pneumonia was gone, vanished without a trace, leaving the doctors baffled. Frank looked at his hands. The arthritis pain that had plagued him for a decade was gone. Helen took a deep breath. Her chest didn't hurt. Her heart beat with a strong, steady rhythm. "Frank," she whispered, "do you feel that?" "I feel light," Frank said, looking around the room. "Like I'm 20 years old again." The door opened. The stranger walked in. He was no longer wearing the wet denim jacket. He was wearing a simple white shirt, and the hospital lights seemed to dim in deference to him. He carried a tray with 2 cups of warm tea. He placed the tray on the table and pulled up a chair. He looked at them with a love so intense, it made Frank want to cry. "We saw the news," Frank said softly, pointing to the TV in the corner where footage of Michael's arrest was playing on mute. "Is it true? Is it over?" The stranger nodded. "Justice has been served, Frank. He will not hurt you again. The money he stole has been recovered. It is being returned to you with interest." Helen began to weep. "I didn't want him to go to jail. I just wanted him to come home." "I know," the stranger said, reaching out to hold her hand. "A mother's love covers a multitude of sins. But he chose darkness, and I could not let his darkness extinguish your light." Frank looked at the stranger's hand resting on Helen's. He saw it. On the wrist, just below the cuff of the white shirt. A scar. Round, ragged, ancient. Frank's eyes widened. He looked at the stranger's other hand, the same scar. He looked up at the stranger's face. The eyes were no longer brown. They were like flames of fire, warm, golden, infinite. The air in the room grew heavy with holiness. The hum of the medical machines faded into a choir-like silence. "Sir," Frank whispered, his voice trembling. Who are you?" The stranger smiled, and in that smile, Frank saw the creation of the world. He saw the stars being hung in the sky. He saw the Red Sea parting. He saw a cross on a hill. "You called for me," the stranger said softly. "On the highway. When the wind was howling and you had no hope left, you cried out my name." Helen gasped, covering her mouth. "Jesus!" He didn't answer with a yes or no. He simply stood up. The room filled with a light that didn't cast shadows. "I am the Good Shepherd," he said, his voice resonating in their souls. "And a shepherd does not leave his sheep to the wolves." He touched Frank's forehead. He touched Helen's forehead. "You have honored me with your life. You have loved when it was hard. You have given when you had nothing. Now, rest. Your winter is over. It is time for your spring." Frank and Helen blinked. When they opened their eyes, the stranger was gone. But on the bedside table, where the tea had been, sat a deed. A deed to a property in the rolling hills of Missouri, paid in full. And beside it, a note handwritten on hospital stationery. "For the meek shall inherit the earth." 12:30. Chapter 16. The Epilogue. Prison and Paradise. Narrator. The trial of Michael Miller was the fastest in Texas history. The audio recording was damning. The financial records were irrefutable. But the thing that sealed his fate was the testimony of the highway patrol officer who found the tire tracks at mile marker 219. Michael was sentenced to 25 years in federal prison without the possibility of parole. Today, Michael sits in a 6x8 concrete cell. He has no Italian suits. He has no view of the skyline. He has no friends. His investors sued him for everything he owned. His penthouse was sold. His car was auctioned. He is exactly where he feared he would be. Poor, alone, forgotten. He spends his days staring at the wall, replaying that night in his head, wondering how a truck appeared out of nowhere, wondering who the man was. Sometimes, at night, he thinks he sees a light in his cell, a judgment gaze that follows him into his dreams. But 1,000 miles away, in the quiet hills of Missouri, there is a different kind of life. Providence Farm is the most beautiful place in the county. The grass is always green. The flowers bloom longer than anywhere else. Frank and Helen live there now. They aren't rich by the world's standards, but they never worry about money. The recovered funds from the fraud investigation were enough to ensure they never have to work again. Frank is 85 now, but he walks without a cane. He spends his mornings tending to a small garden of prize-winning roses. Helen is 83. Her heart is strong. She bakes pies for the local orphanage and teaches Sunday school. They never saw the stranger again, not in person. But every evening, as the sun sets over their porch, painting the sky in shades of purple and gold, they sit in their rocking chairs, holding hands. They watch the light fade, listening to the wind rustling through the wheat fields. And sometimes, just when the wind hits the chimes on the porch, they hear a whisper, a familiar voice. I am with you always, even to the end of the age. 15 Hunt Rock. Closing thought. Narrator. The story of the Millers is a warning and a promise. It is a warning to those who believe they can climb to the top by stepping on the people who held them up. It is a reminder that greed is a heavy chain, and sooner or later it will drag you to the bottom. But it is also a promise. A promise that when the storm is at its loudest, when the night is at its darkest, and when the world drives past you without a second glance, you are not alone. Someone is watching the highway. Someone is listening to the cry of the broken. And if you call out, he will answer. This has been The Miracle on Interstate 40. Thank you for listening.